Okay, we have just seen Donald Trump arrive at Windsor Castle with the First Lady Melania. There we see Prince William and his wife Kate greeting the US President and the First Lady there. King Charles and Camilla are then yet to greet both the First Lady and the US President. They will then be received in the second state visit to the United Kingdom, an unprecedented visit which hasn't been done in modern history for any leader to the United Kingdom. A state visit is a hugely expensive visit to the United Kingdom, which is the full traditional welcome, which includes a visit to the royal grounds of the United Kingdom, a visit from the royal family. It usually involves traditional British activities that includes that of shooting, royal pageantry, carriage rides, etc. What you're seeing in front of you, you see Queen Camilla and King Charles meet with the US President live from Windsor Castle there, one of the many royal stately homes, possibly the most well known, the second name of the King of the United Kingdom. There we see Charles dressed in blue alongside the US President greeting him. Okay, as you see there, Donald Trump meeting British royal family officials, seemingly very fond and of meeting them. You can see the smile on the president's face there. Very well fond of the royal British family. Here's what's going to unfold over the next few hours. We just saw Trump arrive at Windsor Castle with the First Lady, where the pair were greeted by the Prince and Princess of Wales, Prince William and Princess Kate, otherwise known. And then they walked along the lawn at Windsor Castle, where they met the King and Queen, Charles and Camilla, respectively. And then they would enter the royal coaches. The 6 of them are now taking part in a carriage procession through the grounds of Windsor, passing through the George IV gate into Windsor Castle. Those are the plans. And then the carriages after that are set to arrive at the quadrangle, Windsor Castle, and a British Army Guard of Honour will ready for inspection. Afterwards, the American and the British national anthems will be performed by the Merz Band of Grenadier Guards. And the Scots Guards, King Charles and Trump will inspect the Guards of Honour. And then finally, lunchtime, once the ceremony in the quadrangle wraps up, they will move on and over to the Windsor Castle for a private lunch. Okay, we are now joined by Andrew Latham. He is a professor of international relations, and he joins us live from Minneapolis to discuss this further. Andrew, thank you for joining us. We are seeing pomp, and that is certainly what was promised in this second state visit to the United Kingdom. What is expected here, both ceremonially and, of course, politically as well? Many are calling this a sort of political soft power for the United Kingdom when it comes to flattering Donald Trump. What are your thoughts on this second state visit for the US President, Andrew?
Well, first of all, it's an unprecedented second state visit for a serving U.S. president. And that says a great deal about President Trump's affection for the UK and for the monarchy, also his connection to Scotland via his mother's family. So there's that. Um, so pomp and circumstance for sure. That benefits both Trump in terms of, as you put it, his soft power abroad, but also at home. It just makes him, he needs every bit of help he can get at home with respect to soft power. But there's some, and of course, Prime Minister Starmer benefits, and the Brits in general benefit because this is the world's #1 great power, and he seems to have a special fondness for the UK and the royal family. Having said that, there are some, let's say, hard power issues on the table as well, having to do with tariffs and steel tariffs in particular. The UK government would really like those reduced from 25% to something a little more manageable, maybe to do away with them altogether. And perhaps this special relationship, which goes back to the Second World War, but is extra special now, as Donald Trump might put it. This is an opportunity perhaps to, on the margins at least, negotiate some kind of commitment to reduce those tariffs. So soft power, pomp and circumstance, theatrics, yes, it's all going to be there, the Grenadier Guards, the Scots Guards, the King and Queen, etc. But behind the scenes, below the surface, on the margins, in the corridors, wherever, I think there's going to be some negotiations around those tariffs.
Yes, of course. And Andrew, and how do you think the American public are going to be viewing this? Of course, Donald Trump, it's been quite an eventful week in America. Of course, Donald Trump, that Epstein case still is following Donald Trump and actually has followed Keir Starmer here, of course, him sacking his ambassador to the United States this week after Mendelssohn's links with Epstein have been exposed in those documents. So maybe this could be seen as both men needing this visit to overtake those headlines. But how are people in the United States going to be looking at these visits, especially at this moment when Donald Trump is coming in coming under such pressure at home?
Well, it's ironic, given that the United States was formed through a rebellion against the British monarchy and against the British government, that there always is a kind of residual affection, as it were, amongst Americans for the royal family. Not everybody shares that, of course, but I think it's safe to say that it plays well. And this administration and the government on the other side of the pond, as it were, the Starmer government, need this because, as you say, the Epstein issue keeps popping. More and more revelations, not quite daily, but pretty close. And some positive light, a positive vibe is needed on both sides of the Atlantic. And so this is one of those opportunities. There's going to be a lot of what the Brits do, arguably better than anybody, which is the pomp and circumstance, which is parading for and parading the royal family. Or is it two royal families with President Trump on the scene? So I think, yes, this will be an opportunity for both the Starmer government and the Trump administration to cast their respective governments and administrations in a more positive light, to maybe distract people a little bit. But the tariff issue is not going to go away. Britain's long-term decline is not going to be reversed by this. Britain is in possibly the worst shape it's been, certainly in my lifetime and possibly in several lifetimes. The Trump administration is facing all kinds of headwinds and difficulties. This might be an opportune moment for everybody to take a breath and to reflect on something, at least theatrically, way more positive.
Yes, and Andrew, they call the relationship with between the United Kingdom and the United States the special relationship. This is, as you said, is a unprecedented second state visit for Donald Trump, an invitation from the King. The UK was the first country to have a trade deal with the United States. Do you think this quote-unquote special relationship between Britain and America still carry strategic weight, or is it more of a ceremonial idea now?
I think it's not quite ceremonial, but certainly symbolic. Look, the Brits still have a couple of aircraft carriers. They still have one of the few European fighting forces, at least in Western Europe, that can actually fight. And of course, the city of London is a financial superpower. Britain still is a player, even if it's on the margins of Europe. And it still looms large in the American political imagination or geopolitical imagination. So I think symbolically this is important. It signals that the special relationship in some way, shape, or form is still a thing. Maybe President Trump would call it the very, very extra special relationship. I'm not sure. But when interests collide, as they inevitably do amongst powers, then there's no doubt in my mind that the Americans will do what's best for the United States and the Brits will do what's best for the Brits. Right now, there's a certain alignment on a symbolic level, but this tariff issue is going to be, President Trump is deeply invested in this. Prime Minister Starmer really needs a deal on this, and we'll see how this clash of interests plays out. My suspect is that the Brits will get, as they tend to with President Trump, a special deal to go with the special relationship. Whether it will be zero tariffs or 15% or merely 20% remains to be seen, but I think there'll be some kind of a deal done.
Yes, indeed. We have seen presidents addressed UK Parliament when they have previously attended state visits like these. Barack Obama famously got a sort of Hollywood welcome. Barack Obama, we've just had a former UK minister on, and he was telling us that Obama is set to speak at a sold-out arena show next week in London. How do you think these two state visits, how do you think Donald Trump's state visit with the staunch opposition around the UK is going to differ with the likes of Obama, or a democratic president, to a more Trumpist president? We can call it Trumpism now, if we can.
Yeah. Well, there is a special relationship, as we've been discussing, but it's not. The United States is not viewed positively by all Brits. The United States, as a kind of imagined great power, is often portrayed in the British press and amongst certain segments of the British population in a very negative light, kind of imperial power, a bully, et cetera, et cetera. Barack Obama cut in the opposite direction from that. He humanized the United States in a sense. He appealed to the British left in a way that previous American presidents simply hadn't been able to. Trump does not appeal to that demographic, that constituency, the left progressive wing of the British public. In fact, he rubs them the wrong way, and in mixed metaphors, he pushes all the wrong buttons. So when we put the reaction of the British left to these two occasions, the state visit plus the talk, the Obama talk, I think the Obama talk will go down better. Although he's not an uncomplicated factor in the British imagination. But on the left, if Donald Trump says the sun will come up in the morning, they will disagree with him on that. He is just the avatar of everything that the British left dislikes. So, yeah, we're going to see amongst the British progressives, we're going to see two very different reactions to two very different speeches by two very different American political figures.
Yes, Andrew, thank you very much. Do stay with us for further updates. We will, of course, bring you all the updates from Trump's state visit as we get them. But now we move on, where according to the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, India's ongoing participation in Russia's military exercises and its purchase of Russian oil are hindering the European Union's efforts to strengthen ties with the country. Speaking on Wednesday, Kallas emphasised that the EU's partnership with India goes beyond trade, highlighting the importance of adhering to a rules-based international order. She pointed out that India's involvement in military activities with Russia and continued oil imports stand as major obstacles to deepening EU-India cooperation. Kallas made these comments while unveiling the EU's new strategy to improve its relationship with India. Apologies. We are now joined by Major General Dr. Rajan Kochhar. He's a major strategic and defence expert, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. What are your thoughts on these statements and from the Kaja Kallas here, Major General?
My observation, my first impression of this comment is that it is directly related to what Trump is trying to emphasize, especially if you remember in the last G7 summit, Trump has tried to bring home the point that we need to pressurize China and India in terms of tariffs, in terms of sanction, because of its oil purchases from Russia. So I think a similar kind of a stand is being mooted by the European Union now, based on what Trump is trying to say, and also it has been slightly aggravated, I would say, by exercise Zapad, which you know is just culminated in Russia, where Russia undertook it along with 23 countries, and most significantly, India was also part of that exercise. Around 65 troops of ours took place. They need to understand that we are not an ally of Russia. We are not going to fight along with Russia in case of there is a war happening there. It is basically a routine affair, because exercise Indra, exercise Milan, has been happening over the years. And not only that, today at the same time, there is a joint exercise between the US Army and the Indian Army also. So it clearly shows that we follow a path of strategic autonomy. We are not aligned as an ally to either the United States or to Russia. So I think this kind of observation which is being made by the European Union, it's not understanding that India values its sovereignty and its energy security. We are doing it for our own economy. We are doing it for our own national interest. We are not interested in fueling the war. As you would have seen Prime Minister Modi repeatedly telling the world, including Zelensky, he speaks to Putin also regularly, to end this war. We are not interested in prolonging the war between Russia and Ukraine. And, India would be the last country to fuel this war or to accelerate this war in terms of support to Russia. So I think we are doing it for our own national interest, and especially the West has to understand, because they are not trying to understand the concerns of a country which believes in taking care of its own economy. And one important aspect is whatever crude oil we are buying from Russia, we are refining it in our own countries, and we are giving it to the European countries also. So it is a world trade mechanism which takes place in this manner. And I was surprised at Peter Navarro's statement also, when he's supposed to be an economist. I have
Major General Kochhar, do you mind if I interrupt you? Apologies.
Please.
Brussels, of course, it insists this partnership with India is about values and not just trade. Do you think the EU is being realistic in demanding India distance itself from Russia, of course, given the history between the two countries as well?
You see, it's not possible for India. You have to understand the situation in which India is. We have been largely dependent on Russians for our defense and energy sectors. If I can tell you that almost 65 to 70% of the military equipment which we have in terms of our aircrafts, our tanks, our artillery guns, our ships, our submarines, our aircraft carriers are of Russian origin. You just cannot cut the umbilical cord. They are very strong relations, right? If I can narrate to you 1971 war, how the Russians came to our aid when the Americans were threatening to bring in the Seventh Fleet. So you need to understand that Russia has stood by India through thick and thin, and he is a true friend of India. Just because he fights a war with Ukraine doesn't mean you straight away you cut off your relations. And I would like to show the mirror to the Americans themselves. They themselves
Okay.
are indulging in buying Russian oil and
Okay.
energy and all, and they are trying to tell us the right path. Uh,
Major.
what the Americans have been doing in other countries. Talk about Iraq,
Okay.
talk about Afghanistan.
Major General, thank you
So
very
I
much.
don't
Apologies
think-
for interrupting you. We have run out of time. Do stay with us. We are moving on. The European Union on Wednesday has proposed significant measures to curb trade ties with Israel and sanction ministers in response to the ongoing war in Gaza. However, the proposal faces significant hurdles as key member states show reluctance to adopt these actions. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas emphasised that the goal of the measures is not to punish Israel, but to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. She called an end to the war, the cessation of suffering, and the immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas. We are now joined by Andrew Latham once again. He is a professor of international relations and he joins us live from Minneapolis. Andrew, of course, the European Union is a bloc of 27 countries, all with different heads of state, all with different politics, all with different stances on Israel. What are your thoughts on Kaja Kallas' statements here, proposing significant measures to curb trade ties with Israel and sanction particular ministers, including that of Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, and the national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Your thoughts on these words and possible actions of Kaja Kallas there?
Yeah, on the one hand, I think this is Kaja Kallas trying to carve out a more prominent foreign policy role for the European Union. That is not one of its strengths. As you pointed out, they're made up of 20-odd members, all of whom have different national interests, and there aren't really sufficient or adequate mechanisms at the European Union level to coordinate foreign policy, especially around a contentious issue like this. So I think to one extent, in one sense, bureaucratic empire building, perhaps on her part, but certainly institution building, strengthening the EU in this respect. On the other hand, I rather suspect that she's channeling the political views of a substantial number of EU member states who increasingly have to be responsive to immigrant constituencies or native-born constituencies that tend to favor the Palestinian cause over the state of Israel. And I think that's part of what's going on here as well. There's also, I think, perhaps a little bit of grandstanding. Her name has popped up in the last few weeks more than I've ever heard it before, around the Ukraine issue, around India and oil, now around this particular issue. So one is moved to wonder if there are some personal, professional dynamics at play here. I wouldn't read I'm not in a position to read too much into that, but I think it's at play. Will it come to anything? I think the individual member states will do what they want to do with respect to Israel's military action in the Gaza Strip. I don't think the EU will have a very prominent role to play, except perhaps as a talking shop where ministers and their subordinates can exchange views. But this, I think, will be driven by national interest and national policy and will not be a prominently European Union initiative.
Okay, Andrew, do stay with us. We have some further updates coming up. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz warned that a dictated peace in Ukraine would encourage Russian President Vladimir Putin to seek his next target. Speaking to the Bundestag, Merz said Russia's recent violations of Polish and Romanian airspace reflect a long-term pattern of boundary testing and sabotage. He stressed that any peace deal must respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, warning that without a peace, without freedom, would empower Putin further. Listen in to what German Chancellor Friedrich Merz had to say.
Ein Diktatfrieden, ein Frieden in Unfreiheit, eine Kapitulation. Und nichts anderes haben wir heute Morgen hier gehört. Eine Kapitulation würde Putin nur dazu ermutigen, sich sein nächstes Ziel zu suchen. Meine Damen und Herren,
Merz also announced plans to visit countries outside the transatlantic region to discuss trade relations, emphasising that new global agreements are vital for Germany's export-oriented economy. We're now joined by Major General Dr. Rajan Kochhar, who once again is a senior strategic defence expert, and he joins us live once again from New Delhi. Thank you very much. We have seen incursions from Russia within the past week. 19 incursions into Polish airspace and 1 incursion into Romanian airspace. This has, of course, raised alarms in the east. And, of course, diplomacy has seen to falter in recent times, moving towards a peace deal. These words from Merz saying a dictated peace would only encourage Putin to strike again. Do you agree that anything short of full Ukrainian sovereignty risks rewarding aggression here?
You see, Merz stand, the Chancellor's stand is consistent with what the European Union stand has been on this war so far. There has been a difference of opinion, I would say, with regard to how Trump visualizes this entire thing and how the European Union visualizes the same. And therefore, there was a meeting in Washington where all the European leaders were there to discuss this aspect with Trump. So what is emerging now is that the Chancellor is rather addressing more to his domestic audience, at the same time to the EU partners, and also sending us a signal to Moscow that Zelensky will continue to fight. European Union is going to stand by him, and in terms of political strength, in terms of military strength, and in terms of diplomatic strength, the European Union is going to be with Zelensky. But he fails to understand one thing, because in case you prolong this war, and you see it's now 4 years, and what I'm seeing now is there is an escalation from Moscow. And this escalation, today itself, there was a reported news that the rail infrastructure has been targeted in central Ukraine, and especially the logistics which moves along these rail infrastructure. 23% of the entire rail infrastructure of Ukraine has been destroyed by the Russians. And more than 54 power stations, sub-power stations have been finished. So in case you want to prolong this war, you can keep on urging Zelensky to fight, because he is not able to counter this offensive. We are seeing 4 major areas where the Russian has launched offensive in the last 15 days. And there has been huge losses on part of Ukraine. So if you want this war to end, you have to accept a certain loss of territory. You just can't say sovereignty is affected, because in a war, there is bound to be a loss and there is bound to be a gain, and you have to accept this loss at this stage. If 20% of Ukraine has to be given away to stop the war, so be it, because the Russians are not going to relent on this, and Putin has made it absolutely clear to Trump that this condition of ours, as far as territory is concerned, is non-negotiable.
Okay, we do have more updates coming out of the conflict. Do stay with us. Russia's space chief, Dmitry Banakov, has said that Russia will soon have a rival to Elon Musk's satellite internet service, Starlink, as it tries to shift away from outdated thinking that has allowed SpaceX to win the crown of satellite dominance. Starlink has said that it operates the world's largest satellite constellation with more than 8,000 satellites, and Musk is credited by Russian officials for revolutionizing the launch of space vehicles to Russia's cost. Bakanov said that Russia is moving ahead on creating an alternative to Starlink, operated by Musk's SpaceX, which provides internet services via a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites and is widely used in remote areas and conflict zones. As per reports, Starlink is used by Ukrainian forces in the war with Russia. We are once again joined by Major General Kachar to discuss this further. Major General, Starlink has been crucial by Ukrainian forces in the war. There was even one point where Elon Musk threatened to withdraw it when President Zelensky and Donald Trump clashed in that infamous Oval Office encounter. How much of a game changer would it be if Russia were to develop its own system of a similar kind?
A very important aspect of warfare, not only of warfare, I would talk of civilian communication also. Because we have seen in this war how Starlink has really helped Ukraine in establishing its communication since 2022. If you remember the initial part of war, there was a cyber attack by the Russians, and the entire ground-based communication of Ukraine were brought towards standstill. And it was Starlink's effort which came into being to restore it in the shortest possible time. Now, looking at the future, see, Russia has got Tobol and Kalinka are the two important systems which are a counter to Starlink or to disturb the Starlink, but they are not enough because they don't have that kind of a capacity or the capability to counter the network of Starlink. Even Starlink is now coming to India. So if Russia has a mindset now that in case we want to have a system which is operational, which is robust, and which can challenge the satellite communication domain in this world, it has to come out with a fairly modern and advanced system like Starlink's having hundreds of thousands of satellites in the orbit. So I think Russia is taking the right decision because it is not only for their own indigenous capability, it is also to market it as an economic model, because in case Russia, I'm given to understand that has the capability to develop a system which can counter Starlink, so it will be able to challenge the market of Starlink in this entire world, because right now Starlink has got a total monopoly. So I would think that it's a very, very positive thought from the Russians, because they need to develop a system which has technical reliability, a system which has the international reach, and a system which can take care of the new kind of warfare, which is the space warfare.
Okay.
So I think both operationally as well as internationally, this system of this thought of the Russians going in for an advanced system is fairly good.
Yes, thank you very much, Major General Kachar, for joining us here on the programme. Pleasure, and thank you for taking the time. In a dramatic moment during Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial, a group of families whose loved ones are being held captive by Hamas disrupted the proceedings. They loudly protested the ongoing hostage situation in Gaza, highlighting the plight of 48 hostages, including 2 Americans still in captivity. The protest was quickly halted by security, with Netanyahu dismissing it as a form of incitement against him and his family. Meanwhile, the UN Relief and Works Agency has expressed grave concern over the escalating humanitarian crisis in Gaza, describing the situation as one of the exponential fear. The agency calls for an immediate ceasefire and unrestricted access for aid delivery. UNRWA warns that the ongoing blockade and airstrikes are worsening conditions for civilians. We're now joined by Ali Mohammed Abushbak. He's an independent Palestinian researcher and he joins us live from Cairo. First of all, Ali, I just want to briefly touch on Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial and what this outburst of protesters during that says about the current situation inside Israel. What does that situation say about the discontent that the Israeli public is feeling about the current decisions that Benjamin Netanyahu is making in regards to this conflict?
Thank you, Thomas, for having me. This is what we have mentioned many times, and the Israeli community, believing that Benjamin Netanyahu waged this war for his benefit and to avoid the court and the corruption court, especially the Qatar gate that he's alleged that received a corruption and received a bribe and a gift from Qatar's administration, and his one of the employee in his office also received the money from Qatar for several of the aims, and the Israeli community now believe in that, and most of the hostages, captive families believe in that. It's a personal purpose, this war. That's it. More than 100 protests that established in Israel since the very beginning of the war. The families, the captives' families, they are organized and mobilized. More than 100 protests in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, and several of Israelis' area. Just because they have this belief, and all the report, even Haaretz also, and Ma'arif, most of the Israeli left-wing newspaper, they understand this. Also, that magazine Plus 972 confirmed these things. Benjamin Netanyahu, he's using this war for two things: to avoid this court and to avoid the judgment in this court. One side, other side, to make his coalition happy, Benefir and Smotrich, who's considered as infamous according to several countries in Western, and they didn't give them, deny their visa to enter their lands, Benjamin Benefir and Smotrich. As I mentioned, also the continuous protests in Israel are desperate also families that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to hear their demands and their appeals. So that will create a ripple, and it will create a chaos in Israel itself. So the continuous protest without any progress and without any outcome, so that will increase their tool in protest. Now they are protesting in peaceful way, and tomorrow we don't know how that situation it will exacerbate it, especially their loved one under at risk because of the Israeli invaded Gaza and the major Israeli operation in Gaza during to the second phase of the Guardian chariot. So that's imposed a danger to the Israeli captive in Gaza, and most of the families, and also when Benjamin Netanyahu he bombarded Qatar, all the families confirmed that he signed on the paper about the death of their their loved one and their children in Gaza. So the things is make it more complicated. Benjamin Netanyahu, most of the Israeli newspaper and the news and website, they consider him as a mad. What he's going to do, he's going to involve Israel in regional war, or what? He targeted a civil nation in Arab area or Middle East. He targeted Yemen. And also, by the way, Thomas, today there is a Israeli siren started playing in of area in Israel because of the Houthis missile reached to the Tel Aviv yesterday and also today. So that's increased the situation, and that's also the development of situation on the ground, it's going to out of the control of Benjamin Netanyahu. If most of the Israeli community reveal his real face, that will create a several of division in the Israeli community. The military, as mentioned before, the military commander, they warned Benjamin Netanyahu.
Okay.
There is no purpose.
Ali, I'm so sorry. We have run out of time this hour. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Well, as we've said, that is